Check it out, that's the population of New Zealand, just to give you a little context. And he's also the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University's Tokyo School of Business. He's also a longtime advisor, mentor, and friend of ours at Wild Agency, and it's my pleasure and privilege to announce it. Dan Ariely.
Thanks a lot. So I want to talk a little bit about irrationality. By the way, when Neil asks people who is irrational here, I don't think you really answered the question, so I'm going to ask it again. How many people here in the last month have eaten more than you think you should? How many people here in the last month have exercised less than you think you should? How many people here have ever texted while driving? Be honest. Final question. How many people here have ever had unplanned, unprotected sex?
Today?
So we have lots of irrational tendencies, lots of things that get us to behave not in the way that we want. And today I want to talk about some of those effects. And I want to talk about some cases in which gathering data is great, but you need to also think about what to do to change the environment that you're dealing with. So if you're measuring everything that is happening at this particular point, you'll know everything about that, or as much as possible. But the question is, how do you envision new opportunities, new realities? How do you envision new setups, and then create some experiments to test it? So I want to tell you something about those. But I want to start by showing you a couple of visual illusions, similar to Neil's point, to kind of get you to think about human biases in decision making. So these two towers of Pisa, which one is leaning more to the right? The one on the right. How about now? The same thing. In this illusion, you see the top hatch is what color? Brown. The bottom is? Yellow, orange. Turns out they're identical. If I cover the background up, you can see that they're identical. Now, what's interesting about visual illusions is the moment I take the background away, the illusion pops right back. Right? Now you all know that these are identical, but nevertheless you can't help but seeing them as being different. By the way, the interesting thing about this visual illusion is that you think you're comparing this brown patch to this orange patch, but in fact you're comparing the brown patch to its immediate environment and the orange patch to its immediate environment. Where actually the comparison is very different, and we'll talk about this principle a little bit later. It's also the case that everybody has this mistake. It's not as if you're older and you've seen more, you don't get this mistake. It's not as if men and women are different, people from different culture. If you can see, you have this illusion. It's something very basic, very standard. Our brain takes information from the outside world and translates it for us to comprehend. And in this translation, there are some inherent biases and inherent changes to the data. And because of that, if we rely on our perception, our senses, and so on, we could get things wrong. And we could get things wrong time after time in a consistent, systematic, predictable way. So I want you to think about illusions as a metaphor for how we make decisions. And I'm going to give you some examples now of decisions we make in day-to-day life, which are similar to that. So this is a plot. I hope many of you have seen this plot before, but it's so important, it's worthwhile talking about this a little bit more. This is a plot that shows the percentage of people in different countries in Europe who are registering for the organ donation program. And you see countries on the right that give a lot, and countries on the left that give very little. And when I ask my students why do some people give and some people don't give, they usually think that it has to do with culture. You know, usually when you give a gift to somebody, you get to look in their eyes, they appreciate you, they feel like they owe you something maybe. Organ donation is not so much. It's a strange gift that you give after you die to somebody who will never find out that you're the person who gave them this gift. And because of that, it's really unclear how it fits in the world that we understand as gift giving. So why do some people give and some people don't? Is it because of community? Is it because of religion? Is it because of the law? No. In fact, if you look at this list, you see countries that we think of as being very similar behave very differently. Sweden, 86%, Denmark, 4%. Germany, 12%, Austria, 100%. Depending on the audience, you can talk about France and the UK as being similar or not. But the most interesting comparison for this group is the comparison between Holland, the Netherlands, and between Belgium. Now, what's interesting about this is that Holland is the highest giving country in the low giving countries. And you can ask yourself, how did they get there? Well, they got there after a huge marketing campaign. They mailed everybody in the country a letter begging them to join the organ donation program. They had coverage on television, on news. They even had a reality show. This was a reality show in which the person who was about to die could decide who is going to get their organs. You would be happy to know, by the way, that this reality show did not have a second season. So what is the difference? It's not culture, it's not the religion, it's not the law. The explanation is very simple. It all has to do with the enrollment form where people go to register, the DMV, for example. Some places have a form that looks like this. Check the box if you want to participate in this program. And what do people do when they see a form like this? They do nothing. They don't check and they don't join. Some other countries, the countries on the right, have a different form. It says, check the box below if you don't want to participate. And what do people do now? The same thing. They do nothing, but now they join. Now, in some sense, we all know that. We call this opt-in and opt-out, and we've all enrolled in all kinds of services we had no idea we enrolled. If you get a 4-page document and you only read the first page and you don't pay attention to page 2, 3, and 4, of course some things will happen to you without you knowing. But what's so interesting about this is this is not on page 2, 3, and 4, this is on page 1. In fact, this is the only decision people have to make on the enrollment form. However, this decision is big and difficult and complex. And what happens as decisions become larger? We don't know what to do. And when we don't know what to do, we let the person who designs the decision environment, the form in this case, decide for us. And there are two important points here. Of course, opt-in and opt-out is important, and we can think about the path of least resistance and friction and so on. But there are two more points. One is to recognize that this gravitational force for the path of least resistance is really quite substantial. You think about this difference between about 20% and about 100% in willingness to give our organs, and how dependent this is on what's an easier decision to make. That's really quite substantial. It means that the environment in which we make decision decides for us. We have the subjective feeling that we make the decisions, that we decide what to eat and what to wear, and we decide and we decide and we decide. But in fact, the environment in which we be in place makes a lot of these decisions for us. The other thing is that we are unaware of that. And this is where things like focus groups and consumer surveys are not that useful, and you really want real data. Why? Imagine I sent all of you to the DMV tomorrow, and you got their registration form for organ donation. And half of you got the opt-in form, and half of you got the opt-out form. And let's just imagine you behaved much like these people in these experiments. That if you got the opt-in form, you will not donate, and you got the opt-out form, you will donate. And you got out of the DMV, and I asked you why. I say, why did you decide what you decided? Do you think any of you would tell me the form told me to do so? Of course not. You would come up with a story. And the story would portray you as something thoughtful and careful and smart and intelligent, always making the right decision. But it would hide from you the fact that you were influenced by this form. And that's, by the way, what happens when we ask people for their opinions. They give us stories, sometimes wonderful stories, but they hide what is really causing those decisions. I'll give you a couple of other examples. In this study, this was done at the university, the students came and they asked them to go and get vaccinated. And some people, they told them how important vaccination is. And another people, they also told them how important vaccination is, but they also gave them a map for the infirmary, and they asked them to schedule things on their calendars for when they're going to go. Now, the people who got the information, 3% went to get the vaccination. What do you think was the percentage of people who got the same information, but with also a map and a scheduling diary? Now 26% went to that effect. If you think about it, the information was the same. If people were making decisions based on information, those two things would have to be incredibly similar. But information is rarely the answer for why we make decisions. In this case, it was something trivial, like giving them a map of a place everybody knew where it was anyway. But the key is to get people to schedule things in their calendars. By the way, a few years ago, I asked my friends, I took all the people that I know, and I emailed half of them 3 months before the elections, asking them, this is the US presidential elections, asking them to put a 3-hour block on the election day to go and vote, and not asking half of them, emailing the other half a day before the election. The difference in my group of people who know me was 13% in how many of them showed up. People knew about the election. It was not really a big secret. Putting something on the calendar makes a big difference in terms of whether people go to act on it or not. I'll give you one more example for this. This is an example from a company called Express Script. Express Script is a wonderful company. It's a PBM. So if you have a long-term illness, they might send you medication in the mail every 90 days. Now in the US, the way things work is you go to a doctor, the doctor prescribes to you a branded medication, and then you go ahead with it. And we all know why this happens, right? Because pharmaceutical companies hire very attractive women to go to doctors' offices and buy them lunches and all kinds of other things. So doctors write branded medications. And then this Express Script tries to switch people to generics. So they send them a letter. And they say, please, please, please switch to generics. And what do people do when they get this letter in the mail? Absolutely nothing. So they write them a colorful brochure, and then they send a postcard, and they try all kinds of things. Nothing seems to be working. So one year they gave people zero copay. If you got the branded medication, you had to pay for the generic zero copay. What happened? Almost nobody switched. So they came to a group of us and they said, people hate generic medication. Look at the evidence. It's free and nobody's taking it. And we can't pay people to take it. But if it's free, nobody's taking it. And we said, that's possible. It's possible that people hate generic medication. We have some interesting data for this. But it's also possible that people hate doing anything. And if you think about the details, you as a customer can continue in your own path doing nothing, and Express Script comes and say, please do something different, please do something different, please do something different. Is the fact that you're not doing something different because you don't want this particular offer, or you don't want to do anything? You can't tell. They're confounded, right? They both happen at the same time. So we said, what if we send people a letter? And we said, look, there's no option for you not to do anything. It's a T intersection. If you don't return this letter, your medications will stop. But if you return this letter, you could choose generic at this price or branded at this price. So first of all, virtually everybody returned the letter because the cost was so high. What do you think? What was the percentage of people who switched to generics? Almost 50%. So do people like generic or like branded? The reality, that's not the question. The question is that people hate returning letters. Right? This was the big issue in the equation, was that if people start with branded, they want to start with branded. When they are faced with a decision side by side, they like generic. The environment matters a great deal. Now you and I will sit here and we will say, come on, returning a letter? That's such a small bump on the road. It's a few seconds. It looks trivial. Yes, it looks trivial when you think about it in a rational perspective. But when you're at home, and you get a lot of junk mail, and you don't necessarily want to do it today, or any particular day, the decision itself looks very, very different. And people behave as if even small bumps on the road, as if even returning a letter is a huge barrier that they cannot overcome. I'll give you one more example. This is compliance with insulin. Mealtime insulin, incredibly important to take. Nevertheless, compliance rate is very low. And this is incredibly devastating because diabetes is an illness that can really deteriorate, and if people don't take it in time, deterioration is very high. Tremendous amount of research have been invested to get people to take insulin on time. One of the biggest advances has been in basically changing the way the needle looks like. From looking like a needle to something that looks like a pen, increase compliance rate dramatically. Now, we're still not at the rate we want to be, but if you think about how much research is going into improving insulin, and how much is going to improve the procedures by which we give them to people, the big barrier is not that we don't understand how insulin works. The big barrier is human decision. Okay. Now, defaults, by the way, are everywhere. And the question you want to ask yourself is, are the defaults that you have out there work for you or against you? Are these the defaults that you want to have? So for example, imagine that you all worked for me and we had the 401k plan. And imagine I did not want you to save for retirement. How could I use these things to get you not to save for retirement? I would make it an opt-in form, right? I would make you're out of the system, you have to opt in. And not only that, I would make the form difficult and complex, and you have to submit it in the next building. And then they will give you a ton of different options to choose from. And I would write you a letter that says, "Dear employee, you're about to face the most important decision of your life. If I were you, I would take the time, look at it very carefully, make sure you're really making the right decision." And what will happen? You will take some time, you will think about it, but slowly it will go out of your mindset. Procrastination will take hold, and you will not put money in your retirement fund. I could do everything, make all of these choices complex and difficult and cumbersome, but put you in an opt-out form. And now all the complexity would make it less likely for you to do anything, but you would stay in the system. I'll tell you one other thing about 401k. This reflects what Neil said about loss aversion. We did the following game. People come and they work, and every month they decide how much they want to put for retirement. So people come in and we say, how much are you willing to put for retirement? And let's say they say 4%. And this is a company that matches up to 10%. So what happened? They put 4%, every month the company puts 4% and continues forward. In the second version of the game, the experiment, it's the same thing. How much are you willing to put? 4%, very well. But now, at the beginning of each month, the company puts 10% in. And then the employee puts as much as they want, let's say 4%. And then the company takes the 6% back. Now, automatically it's the same. The company is matching 4%. But every month you see money coming into your account and leaving your account. What happens? Very quickly people maximize their retirement saving. This is not about rational decision, it's about saliency. If you see the money leaving and it's very, very painful, you're trying to do something to prevent that from happening. And again, decisions are just not perfect for many reasons. Okay, everything I've said up to now, if you think about it, relies deeply on the notion that people don't know their real preferences. If you had very strong convictions about donating your organs, about putting money in a 401k, kind of religious conviction, nothing would matter. But the fact is that there's a tremendous range in which we just don't know our preferences. And in this range in which we don't know our preferences, different things in the environment can sway us one way or another. So just to think about it, here are a couple of examples. Imagine I ask the people sitting on my right to write down 3 reasons why you love your significant other. And I ask the people sitting on my left to write down 10 reasons why you love your significant other. And if you don't have anybody right now, think about somebody you want to be with, not somebody you left. Okay, if I gave you some time and asked you to write 3 reasons, and asked you to write 10, And then I say, how much do you love your significant other? What would you buy them for their birthday, for your anniversary? Do you think they'll stay together in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Do you think there would be a difference? After all, I didn't tell you anything new about your significant other. I only asked you to reflect about somebody you know quite well. There is a difference. So who do you think declared greater love to the significant other? Who votes for 3? People thought about 3 reasons. Who votes for 10? Okay, some of you are abstaining, that's illegal, but okay. So you can think about reasons both ways. You can say, well, if we have 10 reasons, we can think more deeply, we can kind of think more extensively. If we have 3, maybe we just focus on the essential, the most important one. The reality is that it's very, very, very hard to come up with 10 reasons. If you've been married for longer, you would know that. And not only is it difficult to come up with 10 reasons, as people struggle with reasons 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, they say to themselves, how much possibly can I love this person? Now, the reality is that you might not need 10 reasons, maybe 1 is enough. But the moment we tell you that you should aim for 10 reasons and you run short, you think that something is wrong in your relationship. The same thing, by the way, holds true for BMWs. It turns out there are no 10 reasons to buy a BMW. You get people to think about 10 reasons, they're less likely to buy one. I also use this trick in teaching. At the end of the semester, the dean likes to see high teaching evaluations. So just before the students submit the end of year evaluations, I ask them to think about 15 ways in which this class could be improved. There's only 15 are too many, they run out, they say, must be fantastic. But the point is that we don't really know, and the way we're being asked to think about something at that moment can change our thought process. Here's another example. Imagine I ask you how often do you floss your teeth, and I gave you a scale from 0 to 9 a day. I admit it's high. Or 0 to 9 a month. And then I ask you, how often do you floss? If you got the top scale, you would answer somewhere on the left. If you got the bottom scale, you would answer somewhere more to the right. But you would not stop there. You would now infer something about your own hygiene habits based on your response. If you got the top scale, you would say, whoa, I'm barely flossing. If you got the bottom one, you would say, look at me, I'm flossing virtually all the time. Now, if we just gave you those 2 things and did nothing, it will go away. But if now, just after putting you in one of those 2 mindsets, I gave you a chance to act, and I say, should you call a dentist to make an appointment? Now your momentary mindset could translate into an action. And if you got the top scale, you would say, call now. If you got the bottom one, you would say, no need to call. We did a related experiment with an insurance agency. This was an insurance agency that said that they sell expensive but very good insurance for cars. But when people call, they care about what? Price. So if you think about the universe of all the things you can think about, these people were just thinking about price. And the question is, how do we get them to think about quality? So we asked them to ask when people call, before I give you a quote, I just want to know on a scale from 1 to 7, how important is it for you to get the kind of insurance that will let you sleep well at night? What do you think people answer to this question? 7. I mean, it's not really a question. But the moment people answered 7, they started thinking to themselves about the importance of quality of insurance and sleeping well at night, and then they were less price sensitive, willing to buy a different insurance. The Wild Agency did a related experiment where they showed people, an insurance agency, the range of coverage and where people are. And you can imagine that most people fall on the low part compared to what is the maximum range. And if you got a scale like this, what would it make you feel? You would clearly see that you're not doing that well. So what happened? This was a mail campaign, right? And we know that the percentage of people who respond to mail campaigns is very low to start with. And without these charts, about 0.34% increased their coverage. With the chart, the percentage increased to about 2%. Now, if you think about it, this is, 2% is still not what we want, but it's an almost 500% lift in terms of the number of people who responded to this. Now, of course, we have a problem. We need to figure out how to get people to open letters and so on, but that's a separate issue. But from the people who are looking at this actually dramatically changed how people viewed the offer. I'll give you one more example of this. Imagine I offer you a free vacation. And I say, what would you rather go? Go to Rome for a week or go to Paris for a week? And some people have very strong preferences, Paris, Rome, but for many people, not clear which one is better. Difficult decision, different art, culture, romance, and so on. Now imagine I added another option that nobody wanted. I said Paris for a week, Rome for a week, or having your car stolen. This seems like a strange offer because, who would not want a free vacation over having your car stolen? But what happens when we add a strange version for this? The regular Paris and Rome, I pay for hotel, flight, breakfast every morning. But now I add something I call Rome Minus. And Rome Minus is the same as Rome. I pay for hotel, flight, breakfast every morning, but I don't pay for coffee. You want coffee, it's €3, you're on your own. What happens when we add this Rome Minus? Does anybody pick it? Of course not. Right? Given that you can have Rome with coffee, why would anybody choose Rome without coffee? But here's what happens. People say Paris versus Rome, not so sure. Paris versus Rome without coffee, I'm not so sure. It's not as if I go there for the coffee. But Rome without coffee compared to Rome with coffee, that one is really clear. And you add Rome without coffee, people start choosing Rome. You add Paris without coffee, people start choosing Paris. I'll give you two examples for this. One is, this is an ad from The Economist from a few years ago, quite a few years ago. And The Economist gave us three options. They gave us an online subscription for $59, print subscription for $125, or both for $125. I read this and I was very excited. I called up The Economist, and this is a little arrogant for me, but I have to tell you that I called them up and I was kind of expecting that they would say, Dan, we're so happy you called, we read one of your papers, we decided to implement this. But if you read The Economist, you know they don't read anything. So I decided to run my own version of this. I showed it to our students. 16% wanted the online version, 84% wanted the combo deal. This was before tablets and so on. And thankfully, nobody wanted dominated option. So for another group of people, I took that out. And what do you think happened? The choice share reversed. This is the cube illusion. Decisions about money are inherently very tough. Is $59 on The Economist online worth it or not? How would you figure it out? Compared to what? 30 lattes? 20 lattes in Newsweek? What is the comparison? Is the combo deal worth $125? Again, very, very tough. Money decisions are very, very complex. So what do? We compare it to something else. Which one? Something that is available at the right context and is easy to compare. Relative to print only for $125, print and online looks like a good deal. There's lots of examples like this. I'll give you one of them. When the first iPhone came out, it was $600. And then very quickly Apple said, no, we're joking, only $400. Is this a good idea or a bad idea? Imagine two universes. In one of them, the iPhone is introduced at $400, and the other one is introduced at $600 and then goes down to $400. And in each of those worlds, your task is to figure out how much this is worth. This is what you could do with this phone you couldn't do earlier. You could do this and you could do this. Is this a $50 value? Is it a $100 value? How would you figure out? Very tough. But in a world in which it used to be $600 just recently, the $400 looks like a much bigger, a much better value. And of course now, all the other products like the big iPhone or the iPad are a consequence of these initial prices. I want to show you one other example. This is a flow from a company called TurboTax. into it. And they basically had this process in which you would, I'm not expecting you to see the small details, but you do your federal taxes and then you do your state taxes. And they said, hi, welcome to the state taxes, and here is what we're going to do. We're going to transfer the information, and here you have to make a decision whether you want to do it or not. And he will ask you some more questions about the state and some more information about this, and then you can file. And they basically had the question of what are points of friction in this that are unneeded. And they basically said, here's the issue. The decision time is coming early in the process. Is this the right thing to do? And they changed all kinds of things. And in particular what they did was they moved the decision from here to later, and they changed some things about here. And basically they've done three things. The first one was that they got people to do all the work for the state filing before they asked them to choose. Right? It's a very different story. Now you've done all the work, do you really want to eliminate all that work? The second thing is they showed people how much money they're going to get from their taxes before they decide to accept or reject this offer. And they also changed the default to e-file. Now, this is not kind of an ideal experiment in the sense that we don't know exactly what these things, each of those things contributed, but the effect was very substantial. But if you think about this, if you think about this process, this is exactly what you need to do. You need to look at the details of what people are going through, and you need to think about what are points in this decision process where the default is not ideal. What are points in this decision process where there's too much friction? When we ask people to make a decision that is too early, that something is just not set right, and how do we optimize that? Okay, let me just finish with the following thoughts. In standard economics, we have a beautiful view of how people make decisions. Shakespeare wrote what a piece of work is man, how noble in reason. We don't know if Shakespeare was serious or not, but this is the view of rationality. In behavioral economics, we don't think of people in this way. We think of people as myopic, vindictive, easily confused, don't really know what they want. In medical terms, we think about people in this form. And in many ways, this is a sad view. It's basically said that the people around us are just not as wonderful, and we are not as wonderful. But there's also a silver lining. And the silver lining is that if you think about people as being predictably irrational, as making systematic mistakes, you can also think about how to improve things. You can look at the world and you can say, this is the result of 7 billion rational people. Or you can say, this is the result of 7 billion irrational people, but we could do better. If we only understood the biases that people have in terms of making decisions, we could do better. And the trick, of course, is to think about what experiments we could do. How do we expand the scope? Think about human motivation and do things in a better way. And let me finish with one quote about big data. And very much like teenage sex, I think you don't want to learn about the world just by observing it. I think you need to go in, you need to try new things, try to sometimes fail, sometimes succeed, do more experiments, and if you'll do that, I think you'll get better outcomes. Thank you very much.